to CX Club Live. Oh, it stopped. Sorry, I was enjoying myself a little bit too much there. Welcome everybody to the first ever CX Club Live. For any of you who don't know me, my name is Ian Williams. I'm the chief pugilist for today's session. I started CX Club about 6 months ago. It's a page on LinkedIn, and the whole purpose of CX Club is it's themed around one of my favourite ever films, which is Fight Club. So for any of you who haven't seen it, it's a film rather starring Edward Norton and Brad Pitt. It's a bit of a cult film. It's a bit of a strange film, to be perfectly honest. What Fight Club is about this underground group of people who like to take quite a adversarial look at society and the way that things run today. And I really like that thing because within the CX space, I see a lot of things which are very, very good. I see some things which are very, very bad. And to be perfectly honest, I see some things which are downright ugly. And that's the whole point of CX Club Live. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. And in the pursuit of this activity, I'm not going to be doing it on my own. I'm going to be doing it with 2 other people. So here we go. I'm going to bring on my old mucker, Steve Sullivan. How are you doing, Steve?
Yeah, good, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad. Just to introduce Steve. Steve and I have known each other for how many years, Steve?
12, I think.
Right, okay. Yeah, that we worked on a project many, many years ago with, I think it was American Express, wasn't it?
Sure.
And that's where we first got to know each other. And since then, we've stayed in close contact. We've worked on a few bits and pieces with each other. Steve runs a business called Channel Doctors. You want to tell everybody a little bit about Channel Doctors, Steve?
Yeah, Channel Doctors is a small consultancy in the sort of customer engagement, customer experience space. Particularly interested in, I guess you call it mediated contact, which normally means a contact centre. There's normally a contact centre in the midst of what I get involved with. So it sort of fits along and crosses over quite nicely with your take on the world, I think, Ian.
Yeah, absolutely. So Steve is the let me see.
Ian, I don't know if you can hear us. We can't hear you.
We've lost our host.
Maybe he's doing this to us on purpose. He's trying to see how we can cope without him.
Yeah. Oh, he's streaming live somewhere else.
Yeah. You would have put that past Ian. I think we'll hold on for Ian to get back to us. But I'm guessing he's introduced me in. So if I just say that I'm Amy. And I'm a project manager, so I used to actually work a lot in contact centres, which is where my background with Steve overlaps. But I run projects to do with software implementation, and how I started in doing that by working with contact centre technology, creating CRM systems and connecting them with telephone solutions and other technology like workflow management, etc., other technology that contact centres required. So from there on, I've always just sort of handled projects as as I'm implementing CRMs, customer experience is becoming to the forefront of some of the work that I'm doing, which then sort of sits quite nicely with what Steve and Ian also talk about and are involved in. Ian's come back on, or he's
Possibly.
trying to.
Well, I'll ask you a question, Amy. So, having a sort of background in the contact center world, is that a help or a hindrance when you're implementing new technology?
I think it's helpful because I understand a lot of. I can look at things from the perspective of an advisor who sits on the phone, because I work quite closely with the advisors. So I don't look at technology at the level that, okay, this is what the IT team wants and this is fit for the IT team. What I tend to do is approach the end users and say, well, what kind of things do you want? What are the problems that you're encountering? Because they're the things we want to fix. If the staff are happy, they'll be more productive, and that will then obviously add to the bottom line. Sometimes it can be a hindrance, and I have experienced it where you have inbuilt ideas and thoughts because of your experience, and then you think, oh, this is the right thing to do, but you need other people to actually be able to say, no, that's not, because especially when people don't come from the industry, they have a completely different take on it because everything's new and you question everything. So most cases, I think it's been a help. In some cases, I have experienced it where I've just gone, okay, this is because I am so programmed to think.
Hello?
Ah,
I think Ian's still
Mr.
trying.
Williams.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
I can hear you now.
I'm really sorry. I have no. This is a technological disaster.
It's okay. We thought you were trying to test us, Ian. So we think we passed the test, don't you, Steve?
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't really need you.
Well, I'm not very happy with this streaming service, and I think I'm going to have words.
Yeah,
Because
I think you should complain to LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's not LinkedIn. It's the streaming service. But anyway, sorry. Where were you, Amy?
So Steve became the host, and I took over your role. So we decided we didn't need you back.
Okay, that's fair enough. Did the whole thing drop out when I left, or did
Yes.
you guys carry on?
We were still on for most of it, weren't we, Steve?
Yeah, I think you were frozen, then you disappeared, then you reappeared. So Amy's just been taking us through the advantages and disadvantages of having that frontline operational experience when it comes to selecting and implementing new technology, which is interesting. And the advantages and disadvantages about having experience, I suppose, that it can be really advantageous to have experience, but you need to be able to shift your mindset. Is a challenge for us all, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly from my perspective, one of the reasons why I enjoy working so much with you, Steve, but also I've been working with you as well, Amy, over the past few weeks, is because within my space, I can often how do we refer to it ourselves? Maybe the CX strategists there is always a danger that you can become far too theoretical and hypothetical, and that you don't stick close enough to what happens operationally at the front end. Yeah. And therefore, working with you guys is always, from my perspective, is always it's a great leveler, because it reminds me of the fact that whatever we do strategically has to bear out some sort of reality in the real world. Okay, so well, look, thanks for taking over there, Steve. I have absolutely no idea what went on there, but anyway, let's just soldier on. So, as I was saying before, the whole purpose of CX Club is themed around the Thumb Fight Club, and it's to try and take an adversarial look at customer experience, some of the good things, the bad things, and the ugly things within the CX space. Because I'm the host, well, I was, I'm going to kick this off with talking about the good and bad and ugly that I've experienced over the past few years. Well, actually, the past 6 months, and a lot of it is closely related to COVID-19. So my bad experience was with an online travel agent. So back in about February, I booked a flight to go to the USA, to New York. in the month of October, so in this month, to go with my wife and my 2 kids to go to New York. My kids have never been to New York. They were really excited about going there. Now, I rather stupidly, I think you might remember this, Steve, I rather stupidly made a bit of a silly mistake. So when you're going through the booking system, for some reason, one of the dates changed, and I didn't double check that date before I pressed the book button. So I pressed the book button, and a couple of hours later, my wife came to me and said, "You do realise you booked us to travel for 3 days, and we were supposed to be travelling for 8 days." And I went, "Oh?" So I booked us to fly out on a Thursday and to fly back on a Saturday, but I booked us to fly out a week too late, so we'd end up only having 3 days in New York. By the time we realised it, it was 11 o'clock in the evening. I'd only booked the flights 3 hours beforehand. So I said, well, okay, you know what, I'm going to wait until tomorrow morning. Second mistake that I made, because when I waited until the next morning and called them, the agency said, well, the ticket's already been issued. And I said, yeah, but I'm calling you within 24 hours. And they said, well, I'm afraid the ticket's been issued. We can query with British Airways, but they might not do anything about it. The travel agency went to British Airways and said, I know you've issued the ticket, this customer has only booked less than 24 hours ago. Can we please amend? And British Airways wholesale outright refused to amend the ticket. So my experience was bad with the online travel agency, but it was even worse with British Airways wholesale. I called British Airways directly, and they said, well, if you booked with us direct, you could change in 24 hours. And I said, yes, but I didn't book with you direct. And they went, well, because you went through a third party, I'm afraid, we don't apply the same rules to third party customers as we do to direct customers. So basically, I ended up with the prospect of losing nearly £1,000 on the basis of the fact that I'd made one mistake that I tried to get rectified. And it's a perfect example of where in the customer experience world they treat one customer differently to another customer as a result of the channel which you come through. So I had to write that £1,000 off, and I went through the process of looking for a new company to book a flight with. So I approached American. I still wanted to go to the Ombudsman and everything like that. And I parked it, and I said, I'll come back to that at some point. And I looked for another flight, and I found one with American Airways that was cheaper than the original flight with British Airways. And I knew that I had a chance to cancel within 24 hours if something went wrong. Now, I booked the American Airways flight, and within about 3 weeks, COVID-19 happened. So I thought, oh my God, I've got 2 flights now that I may not get my money back from. But because I sat tight and didn't actually do anything, I thought, well, wait a minute, if the flight ban in America is still going to be running in October, there's a chance that I could actually get my money back from both. So I called American Airlines about 2 weeks ago, and I said, look, we're not going to be flying to America in October. We're highly unlikely to see Mr. Trump lifting the ban within the next couple of weeks. So can you refund your money? She spent about 10-15 minutes looking at the various different possibilities and ramifications. But she immediately said, don't worry, Mr. Williams, the money will be in your bank account within 5 days. And she didn't have to do that at that point. She knew that nothing was going to change. So she took the decision, she made the decision that she was going to refund my money. Now, as far as the British Airways money is concerned, I still don't have that back. I have to wait until the date of the flight, which is still about 3 weeks away, before I can query it with them. And I have also been told that it may take up to 3 months to get my money back. Okay. So there's an example of the bad, the good, the bad from British Airways and the online travel agency, the good from American Airlines. The third example, which is the ugly. Now, the ugly is where I see things that happen from professionals and practitioners, we should know better, but it isn't a company that's getting something wrong, it's actually CX professionals that are getting something wrong. Now, I'm not going to name the organisation, but one organisation that I worked with did a persona building exercise, and they created what they referred to as psychographic personas. And I went to them and I said, how did you come up with these psychographic personas? And they said, we sat in a workshop and we brainstormed what we believed the psychographic personas to be. And I said, okay, but how would you
Ian, just for the benefit of... Just explain what psychographic means.
Okay.
It's not like I don't know. I'm just asking for a friend.
Thank you very much. So a persona, in my opinion, is an evolution of a segment. But what it is a segment with additional emotional information wrapped in. That's my definition of a persona.
Steve was asking for me. I'm his friend.
and psychographic is about looking at people from the... I went quiet again. Psychographic is about categorizing people according to their attitudes and belief system. Okay. Now, psychographics is a research technique that was introduced in the 80s and 90s, where they would do market research studies of people, for example, going into mock supermarkets, and they would observe people's behavior as they went around the supermarkets and say, okay, we believe that based on what we can see, these are the attitudes and beliefs of that individual in that particular session. So it's a research technique. It's not a brainstorming technique. So when the organization that I was dealing with had done this exercise as a brainstorming technique, they'd been sitting there just coming up with ideas from the top of their head about what their main groups of customers were and what their attitudes and beliefs were likely to be. And I said, so how do you decide which of your customers belongs to which of your personas? And they went, ooh. Well, it's just an interesting exercise. I said, well, there's no point in doing an interesting exercise if there's no commercial benefit or commercial reality. You might have this, ooh, this is what we think our customers are. But if you can't take that model and apply it in the real world to individual customers, then in my opinion, it's a paper exercise. And I believe that psychographics, unless a psychographic persona has been built through research on the back of a customer segment, then it doesn't work. It's a paper exercise. Because most organizations, all they have is transactional and interactional data. And if the only data you have is interactional and transactional, there's no way that you can marry your individual customers up to psychographic personas that have been brainstormed in some kind of workshop exercise. So that's what psychographic... I'm not saying psychographics is rubbish. I'm just saying if you use psychographics as a brainstorming technique, it's not very good. So any thoughts? Have either of you seen anything like that before?
Well, I have seen that. Sorry, we got a chat question from Bob, who might elucidate. Bob. Asking how is that different from a persona? So I think why is a psychographic persona different to a persona? I think
so. Personas can be certainly the way in which I build a persona is I build a customer segment on the back of customer profiles. Customer profiles create customer segments. I typically do what I call behavioral segments. I prefer behavioral segmentation. That's the exercise. That's the process that I use. But then a persona is building emotional information around your behavioral segment in order to understand the emotional as well as the rational needs of the customer. But where psychographics are used is that they're trying to build a profile of a customer based on attitudes and beliefs. Whereas when I build a persona, I build emotional information around a behavioral segment, if that makes sense. So that's the difference between the way I would build a persona and the way other people build personas using psychographics. Now, psychographics isn't a bad thing, but psychographics is a bad thing if what ends up happening is you're doing it as a brainstorming technique. That's my opinion.
Ian, you might want to move a bit closer to your mic because some people are struggling to hear.
Oh, really? Okay. How's about that? Is that
That's better, I think.
okay? Yeah. Okay. It's probably my my Spitz guard that's getting in the way. Okay. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay. So, thank you for the question. Bob, is that Bob Keipel? Have we got Bob Keipel on?
Bob Dolomite?
Oh, I don't know, Bob. Nice to meet you, Bob. Hello. For some reason, I can't see the chat question. Oh, wait a minute. I can now. Ooh. We've got a few questions that have come from the people.
Yeah, I can only see two of the questions.
I will come on to those questions in a minute. However, before we come on to the questions, if that's all right, people will leave the questions until the end of the session. Steve, would you like to introduce your good, bad, and ugly?
Okay, I haven't quite got good, bad, and ugly. I've got interesting and good, and I've got bad. So one that I thought was interesting was I was talking to a big printer company who's got contact centres globally, and one of their big problems is at the contact centre level is understanding what the nature of the problem is, because they don't want to send an engineer out, they don't want to order parts. It's a very expensive process. So like most contact centres, they spent a long time trying to battle to train people to have a level of expertise that an engineer would have, or a kind of the tier one expertise an engineer would have. And what they've discovered is that with home working, they've now got now they've adopted home working, they've got the ability to employ engineers in a contact centre role. So they're no longer having to try and make a contact centre person into an engineer. They've potentially got a problem, which is how do you make an engineer into a contact centre person? So a different set of behaviours and skills and disciplines. But that hadn't occurred to me that just through home working in that very specific area, they've got the ability just to employ different people who you would assume would be better at doing that job of assessing the nature of the problem. So I thought that was interesting. I think they've not solved all their problems, but it creates a different set of problems. That was interesting.
Okay.
And I think because you were showing off about your fancy holiday to New York, I'll virtue signal about my blood donating, because you get crisps and a pack of biscuits. And they've been really good through COVID. I think quite sort of subtly reminding people that they still need blood donations. And in terms of a customer experience, it's not the world's most sophisticated by far, but it's a real little thing they've started doing, in my experience recently, is I'll send you a text message telling you where your unit of blood was used. Not what for, but in which hospital it was used. It's a really small thing, and you normally get it a few days, maybe a week or two after the donation, but it's a great sort of reinforcing technique, probably quite inexpensive. So that's really useful, I think, really interesting. What's bad, I suppose, still I had to contact somebody about my block drain, and they're still really busy because of COVID, apparently. So they've been really busy for 6 or 7 months and still haven't re-established it. Apparently, and this is in the summer when you wouldn't think people would have a lot of problems with their drains.
Wow.
And I think, you know, we all have had a shared experience with COVID, and the more time goes on, your experiences might diverge. Some people quite like lockdown world, some people hate it. But I think this sort of stock message to the world, which is we're really busy and it's really difficult because of COVID, just doesn't really wash. And I think people need to perhaps move on from that, or go for something that's a bit more specific. You might even explain why it's particularly difficult for them. But I think this customer, this persona of one, is starting to get a bit frustrated by it, to be honest.
I can understand that. I said 6 or 7 months. I've never heard anything like it. That is crazy.
No, 6 or 7 months since COVID started, not 6 or 7 months to wait to get through.
Oh right, okay. Sorry, I thought.
Yeah,
that
no.
was what you did.
My train's been cleared.
I was thinking your bathroom must stink.
It was really depressing. The guy turned up with a big. Yeah, I'd spent days trying to unblock it. A bloke turned up with a plunger, and he shoved it in twice and went run the tap because they were sorted and went off in his van.
Oh God, there you go. And you probably have to pay him like a couple of £100 for the privilege or something.
Exactly.
Right. So, do you have any examples, Steve, of the ugly? So, what I'm talking about is that it's not something that an organisation has done good or bad. It's something that customer experience practitioners are not getting right, as far as you're concerned.
One thing that's got worse through COVID again is, I think, an erroneous belief that if you put a 1, 2, 3 minute front end message on your phone lines, telling people lots of information, that you will convey that information to the caller. And I don't think you do. I think people zone out and they just get frustrated. And it might be very important information, and it depends what sector you're in. You know, if you're in the healthcare sector or in your regulated sector, there might be things you think you really have to say. But it's a fallacy, I think, to think that just because you've made somebody listen to a recorded message, any of that information sinks in. And I really don't think it does. And it's like, similarly, if somebody's in a queue, having made a call to an organisation for a service function, it's almost certain, I'd say 90% plus likelihood, that they've tried to sort it out themselves. They've tried to do it online. They've tried to self-serve. So then giving a series of messages to people who are in Everlinks and in call queues saying, did you know you could do X, Y, and Z online yourself? Just gets really annoying, because if you are trying to do that, you've probably already tried to do it. And if you're not trying to do it, you're not interested. So I think there's some kind of erroneous nudge techniques being used as well.
I like that phrase, erroneous nudge techniques. That sounds like
write that down.
That sounds like somebody's second concept album.
My first book, The Erroneous Nudge. I'm working on it.
It sounds like a follow-up to the curious incident of the dog in the night time, the erroneous nudge. Anyway, thank you very much, Steve, for those examples. I'd like now it's my great pleasure to properly introduce and welcome Amy onto the call. Hi, Amy. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much. Always great in your company.
Excellent. Well, I've got to tell everybody a couple of things about Amy. Steve and I have been working with Amy on a little project now for the past few months. And Steve and I have a tendency of waxing lyrical and going off on a tangent to talk about complete and utter rubbish. And Amy's very, very good at bringing Steve back into line, Steve and me back into line when we start being naughty. So she's a bit like a teacher telling the naughty boys at the back of the classroom to behave. The other thing I need to tell you about Amy, and this is new information to me, I only discovered this about half an hour ago.
Oh dear.
She asked what a pugilist was. Because I have the word chief pugilist, so I had to explain that a pugilist is a boxer, but from now on I'm going to be known as the chief pugilist.
I thought Ian was trying to be the chief dog or something, but it'd be interesting to know how many people knew what a pugilist is.
Can everybody put a message in the chat? We've had messages so far from Keith, from William, from Isabel, and from Bob. We've got people coming in. We've got people following this on 2 different platforms. Nobody on Facebook at the moment, nobody on Twitter, but we have people from LinkedIn and people from YouTube. Can you please put your comments about whether you do or don't know what a pugilist is? Can I see it show? Have we got any messages?
Isabel knows.
Does she?
She says she does.
No, I didn't, Amy.
Oh, well done, Isabel. Thank you.
Okay, so Isabel doesn't know what a pugilist is. Steve, do you know what a pugilist is? Right. William, are you still there? William, do you know what a pugilist is?
Yes, he said.
a small dog lover.
See? I'm not the only one. I love the fact that I'm not the only one.
That is crazy. Bob Dolomite, do you know what a pugilist is? No? Well, we'll wait for Bob to respond. And also, I did, but I prefer... Oh, Jack Springman. Hey, Jack, how you doing? Jack does know what a pugilist is, but he prefers your description, Amy. Right? William doesn't know what a pugilist is. Bob Dolomite doesn't know what a pugilist is. And Maria Young doesn't either. So I must be... You're right and I'm wrong, Amy, basically.
Oh, how good does that feel? Well, 1 to 2, baby.
Oh, and an independent LinkedIn user said, pugilist, no clue. So somebody else didn't know what a pugilist was either. Anyway, so Amy, would you like to, please, if you can, tell us about the good and the bad and the ugly that you've experienced?
Okay, so I'll start off with the bad. So earlier on, I think it's a few weeks ago now, I had PlusNet come out to my house regarding my broadband. So
I remember this.
Yes,
yeah.
So I had PlusNet come out to look at my broadband. So I started a contract with PlusNet about 16 or 17 months ago. They've been round, this was their 4th visit, I think, to my house.
Right.
Because, again, the internet wasn't working. The light, which is normally blue, had gone orange, and I just could not get it to work. So what I've had to do, because I'm working from home, quite often I'm having to hotspot from my mobile. So I don't ring them all the time because it's just constant, it's just too much hassle. So anyway, I decided I'd give them a call. After waiting for ages, finally get through to an advisor, and they say, we'll send someone round. So I said to them, well, I explained the situation. I said, you've sent someone round 3 times now. Every single time they do a test, they say that everything's fine, they leave, and they say it's a couple of days and it'll be okay. And then I come back, and then a few days later, it's still the same. The advisor said, well, I need to do a test online now, and then we will see where we take it from there. So he did a test, and he said, oh, I can see that your signal keeps dropping in and out. Right. I was like, okay. So that explains why my internet isn't working properly, so what can we do? And he said, well, they can test it from the main connection to the one on the road to the one in my house. But don't worry, we don't need to check your house, it's your connections outside. I was like, okay, that's fine. So you do that, and it'll be done in about 3 days' time, and it should be resolved. About 3 days later, I get a message saying that they want to, a text message saying they want to book an engineer to come around to my house. I'd already obviously explained to them that they don't need an engineer coming to my house because all the tests have been done. Anyway, so eventually an engineer comes round, does the test as he normally would do, turns around and says to me, oh, everything's working, it's all fine. And I said to him, I know that, I knew you were going to say that, because that's what the other 3 told me. And I said, the problem is, as soon as you leave, there'll be a problem. He said, no, don't worry, everything will be fine. So I said to him, I said, look, you've tested it from point to point, and you verified that there is nothing wrong. I said, can I get a new router, please? He said, I asked the contact centre agent when I was on the phone to them, and they said, no, they don't just give routers out. So I said, you suggest.
We're not just going to provide you with the service that you pay for.
No, they're not going to provide me with. They said, oh, that's the standard router and that's all you're getting. So I said, okay. So I said to the engineer, I said, what do you suggest? He said, I think that's a good idea. You should try to get a new router. And I said, well, can you add that in your notes? Because what I'll do is I'll call PlusNet back and I'll tell them that you've been round and that obviously I've asked for a better router and you also think it's a good idea. And he turned round and said to me, which I was shocked by, he said, I can put it in my notes, but they don't read the notes the engineers put down. I was horrified. I was like, oh no. I was like, okay. But I said, please can you do that? He's like, okay, that's fine, I will do, but they won't listen. So I was like, okay. He then left my house, got to the bottom of my driveway, and the light was orange again. So I had to quickly,
no.
just like, oh no, the internet's gone again. And then he came back, had another look, and he said, don't worry, it'll be okay. So anyway, basically nothing's been resolved. I still have an internet that comes in and out, and I'm having to change providers now.
Yeah, I was remembering you were thinking of changing to another unknown internet provider, whose name I will not mention. but who I use.
Oh.
I think you're switching to the provider that I'm actually with. Anyway. So what about have you got any examples of the good and the ugly, Amy?
The good, yes. So my good experience was with Hiscox. So about a year and a half ago, I needed to get some insurance for an event that I was doing. So I submitted something online to go through what kind of insurance I needed, how long I needed it for, etc. Filled the form in, submitted it. Went through to Hiscox, and I think a day later, maybe 2 days later, I got a message back saying that there was some information that they needed. So would I prefer to have a call with them to go through it, or did I want to deal with them by email? So I just said I'm happy to have a call, because they'd already provided a schedule if I wanted a call. So I picked a call time, and they called me the time and the day that I picked. And the advisor on the phone just basically said, okay, this is the piece of information that was missing. I just need to clarify this with you before we can process it. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And as we were chatting, I said to him, well, I'm not even 100% sure I've got the right insurance, because it's the first time I'm doing this type of event, and I think I've got the right insurance, but I haven't. So he just asked me to explain what the insurance was for. And then he said, that's fine. You could choose this one if you needed this. And then he went through a couple of different options. So we picked the right insurance, and he said, well, there's another bit on the form that I think isn't quite right. I was like, oh, okay, because you can go online and you can open your account up and you can fill this in. Or if you want, we can do it together now. I was like, oh, that'd be great if we can do it together now. So he literally just sent me this, he sent me a link, and said, click on the link and we'll be able to go through the application together. So that was done. Within 15 minutes, we'd solved all the questions, filled in the application form, and my insurance was in place. And I thought, just the smoothness of the whole thing, I thought was really, really impressive. The advisor and Hiscox, they seem to be very, very knowledgeable about the products. Whatever question I was asking, they were able to position it to say, okay, well, have a look at this, or have a look at this product. So that was really good as well. And I think it gave me that level of confidence to know, okay, well, this person is going to be able to guide me and advise me to get the correct insurance that I required.
That's brilliant. That's a brilliant example.
And
I actually use Hiscox for my business insurance, and I've used them for years, and I've never had a problem. So I can back that up. In terms of what about in terms of you work in the CX space as well, Amy, and your specialism, I suppose, is around program management, project management. Is there anything from that side of things where you have seen what you might describe as being ugly from a practitioner's perspective?
I think not necessarily from a practitioner's perspective, but it is something that a practitioner has to manage. A lot of projects, especially now with all the tightening of budgets, etc., and it has been for a few years. People don't have project teams benched sitting on the side waiting to start a project. What people are doing, what organisations are doing, they're using BAU staff to actually deliver project work, which is fine, because they bring in, whether they're a subject matter expert. But the thing around using BAU staff is for the senior leadership teams to understand that yes, you can have BAU staff who are working on projects, but in order to make the project successful, and also to give the BAU staff headspace to be able to think about the project, is to be able to ring fence them off and backfill where required. A lot of the time what's happening is that staff are being told they're doing project work or they're part of a project, but they still have their full-time BAU jobs. And that in the long run is detrimental to the project, because as a result of that, projects will slip, and also you will only get half-hearted time given to the project. So you don't get the knowledge that's always required, and the project's always seen as, from that person's perspective, as the second thing they need to do. It's always last on their list. So I think for senior leaders to actually say, okay, well, if these people are being ring-fenced off of the project, we will backfill for them. and that their time will be dedicated to the project for 2 days a week or 3 days a week. I mean, I have run projects where I have had slippage exactly for that reason, and it's trying to speak to the senior leaders to say, like, you do need to do this. Quite often you do get buy-in, but it does take time for people to understand that you can't just put project work on top of BAU work and people just run with it.
Okay. Thank you very much for bringing that point up, Amy, because that is something that I'm really passionate about. If I can make a comment about that, I'm currently in the process of writing a book, and the book is titled "Don't Blame the Lip Servants and Don't Break the Silos." And the first part, which is blaming the lip servants, is all about when you work with a senior management team and you sit down at the table and the CEO is there, and the CEO says, yes, this is something we want to do, customer experience, yes, this is a priority. And the senior management team are there in the room and they can't disagree because it makes perfect sense. Of course it does. Building your business around the people who give you money, i.e. the customers, it makes perfect logical sense. But what I hear often is CEOs say to their senior team, I want you to do this customer experience stuff, but by the way, you've got no additional resource, you've got no additional budget, and you have to maintain your business as usual. When you walk away from the boardroom and you sit down with individual C-suite members and you say to them, hey guys, you're going to have to do this project, but you've got no additional resource and no additional budget. The problem is they know it's not possible. They're already pushed to the full extent of their abilities. And in order to focus on this strategic project, so to speak, they know they're going to have to let business as usual go. If they let business as usual go, they know they're going to get their backsides kicked by the CEO. So when you're in a situation where you have to focus on two things, but you've got no additional budget, the tendency is to stick with the business as usual, because that's what your contract says you're supposed to do, and to ignore the strategic project, which is why so many CX projects fall over. That's why I say don't blame the lip servants, because you might say that somebody at a C-suite level will pay lip service to doing something, but the reason why they typically turn their back on the project is not because they don't believe in it, it's because they've not been given any additional budget or any additional resource to do it. And just one final thing. This refers to Sean Riseborough, who's recently gone into retirement. His last job was with Bupa, and he speaks very, very eloquently about when he was doing a project with Virgin Media, and they came to the realization that this was a problem that they had as an organization. And they said the first phase of customer experience transformation, they knew that they were going to actually have to make people redundant, which sounds horrible and counterintuitive, but they realized that they needed to get rid of the dead wood, and they needed to get rid of people who were unnecessary to free up the resources in order to plow into subsequent stages of the transformation activity. I know that sounds horrible. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but to be honest, I think it's a sad reality of you know, the world that we live in. Do you have any thoughts about that, Amy?
I think one of the so with regards to the part where you have to let people go, I think sometimes it is a good opportunity to do that, because if you're putting new systems, processes, ideas in place, you do always have people who don't want to change. Now, part of the senior leadership team should actually be looking to change the mindsets of those people, to give them a chance to be able to survive. And the first solution shouldn't be let's get rid of everyone. It should be right. Okay, the people that we don't think we are going to have a challenge taken along with us on this journey. What do we do to get them involved? Once you've tried that strategy, and you will find that it will work with some people and it won't work with others. It's the others that it doesn't work with that you then have to find a plan for. Unfortunately, a lot of times when change programs are put into place, restructuring and letting people go becomes part of it.
Yes, it's a sad reality, but
it is. And I think going back to what I was saying about the BAU staff, when the BAU staff have a choice of working on project or working on their BAU work, they will opt more often than not to work on their BAU work, because that's
course.
something they know and that they're comfortable with. Project work is different, it's something new. So again, as a PM quite often, and it isn't in my remit, but I'm a very hands-on project manager. Quite often I will spend time and effort working on the mindset shift of the team involved to get them to try and get them to understand that the project has to take priority over the BAU work, and I need to support them through that. I know a lot of project managers don't feel it's something they do in their role, but I always feel if it's something that can contribute to the success of the project, then I will, I feel it is in my remit to try and help support the project.
Excellent. Okay, look, thank you very much for those. Oh, sorry, Steve, did you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I just had a thought, but I've never had it before, so it could be rubbish. But I was thinking what Amy was saying. It's reminded me that often in again, in the contact centre world, when you get the frontline people who are selected to be the super users to help that sort of roll out initial training, and how you've described that whole process of initiation and creation of a business case, and then it goes down the organisation. Sometimes it feels like a kind of egg cup shape, that it starts off with lots of engagement by important people who aren't going to have to do the work. Then the engagement diminishes as you go through the middle of the organisation. And actually, one of the upsides of the front line, where you often get people who feel disempowered and disengaged, is you give them something, a new, different job to do, where they've got some autonomy and they can make a real difference through helping to implement a new process or a new system. They can be, really motivated and really engaged. So you almost get this kind of that kind of shape. So sometimes the best bit of a project can be right at the very end, when typically it's out of time, it's out of budget. The well-planned training delivery is now being squeezed into a tiny amount of time. But the people at the pointy end of that are often great, because they're not jaded, because they're engaged.
When I do customer journey mapping, I do sometimes, I obviously introduce customers into that, but I often find that sometimes I get better engagement when I work with people within the organisation, because they see what customers experience time after time. And I have this rule about company-based journey mapping exercises, which is I will not let senior and middle management people into the room. I will only let the frontline people into the room, because they're still enthusiastic, but they're also that they are not jaded in the way that you described, Steve. Anyway, I'm going to quickly move on, because we've got about slightly under 15 minutes. So for some reason, Christopher has gone back to the start of the event, and for some reason he's on 4 minutes. No, I think that everybody else hopefully is still with the event, Christopher. I'm not sure why. Greg Scholes, hi Greg, hope you're all right, mate, has said it's much better on LinkedIn than it is on Eventbrite or YouTube. I don't know why that is the case, because this is at the moment streaming on Eventbrite, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and on Facebook. But at the moment, LinkedIn seems like it's the best one. Jerry Brown is telling us that he was a pugilist. He was, in fact, a boxer. And Isabel Rogers was surprised about the fact that he was a boxer, saying she didn't know. And Jerry says, although it wasn't a long or successful career. So we're still, if anybody still wants to pick a fight with Jerry, you might be okay. What else do we have in here? Jack Springman did know what a pugilist was. I'm just going to the top of the list. Bob Dolomite is still using a pseudonym. There was one question that I was really interested in covering, which came from Keith. I apologise, Keith, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Keith Komet. I'm not sure if we're connected on LinkedIn, Keith, but if we're not, I would welcome for you to connect. And he's asking the question, how have you introduced CX data and metrics to frontline contact centre reps? Right, I'd like to have a quick go at this, if I may, first of all, before I hand it over to other people. What I would say, Keith, is you have to be incredibly careful about how you present CX data and metrics to frontline teams. Let me give you 2 examples. One example I have seen is where you present call durations or call handling times to frontline teams, and you say to them, your call durations are too long. Can you please try and reduce them? Now, if you try and force a frontline member of staff to reduce their call times by showing them what call durations are, what they will typically do is they will try and cut off the call with the customer too soon, which will leave you with an unhappy customer who typically picks up the phone and calls you back. So if you want to reduce call handling times, whatever you do, don't use call handling times as a metric for frontline teams to measure themselves against. That's an example. So you have to be really careful about what you present to frontline people and how you present it to frontline people. That's the first observation I would have. The second observation is about a personal pet hate I have, which is transactional NPS. Now, NPS, we all know, how likely are you to recommend this product or service to a friend or family member. All metrics have weaknesses, including NPS, but transactional NPS is asking the customer the question, how likely are you to recommend a friend or family member on the basis of the last individual interaction that you had with the company? This is murder. It is horrible, because I know people in contact centers, and Steve and Amy, you've probably seen this before, who said, it's really bad when I get measured, my personal performance is measured against transactional NPS, and the customer is giving a bad score, not because of anything that I've done wrong as an individual, but because they're unhappy with the company. And from my perspective, transactional NPS should not exist. So those are two examples of introducing CX data and metrics to the frontline contact center reps. There is a real danger that if you use the wrong metrics or you do it in the wrong way, that you can actually cause more harm than good. So yes, what you need to do is identify the right metrics and introduce them in the right way so that those metrics don't have a counterintuitive or the opposite effect to the one you're looking for, Keith. If you have a very specific question about the business that you're working in, it probably is worthy of a more in-depth conversation. So, Steve, Amy, do you have any thoughts about introducing CX data and metrics to frontline contact center reps?
There was one that sticks in my mind, and it was a wee while ago. It was a few months ago, because it was a Motorway Services, and I think it was a Costa, and it might be Magor Services, and there was a sign up, and I did take a photo, but I can't find it, and it more or less said, after your visits, this I guess is for the loyalty card holders, you might be asked to score our service. Please mark us highly, because our bonus is dependent on it. And unbelievably, this was on display, I guess because they knew the area manager wasn't going to pay a visit anytime soon. But it was perfectly logical, because you're incentivizing people. I guess they're probably on living wage type. You will probably respond to it. So I wasn't sure if it all disappeared.
Sorry, I've lost the last 30 seconds, Steve. I dropped out. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Steve. So you've just given an example. I didn't hear any of it, but it's not important that I hear it.
So Steve, where you dropped out was where you'd said that they probably knew that a manager was coming by, so you saw the sign. So maybe go back to the beginning of your story.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so quickly. So it was in a Motorway Services Costa. They had a sign up by the queue saying to customers that they may be contacted to give a satisfaction score after their visit, and could they give the team a high score because their bonus was partly dependent on it.
Yeah.
And of course, it's perfectly rational, because these people aren't well paid. They probably do a good job, but they want to just make clear to the customers that this transactional CSAT score is really important to them. So if you give people don't always respond to incentives, but sometimes they do. So I think a classic case in point. They're not delivering better service, but they are breaking your system by asking people to be nice to them. then why not?
And I think also that's quite clever, isn't it? Because they're reaching to the human emotion, because you're saying, can you please mark me better because my bonus relates to it. So you naturally maybe feel inclined, less inclined to mark them badly because you know it's going to impact someone's livelihood. So I think that's quite clever.
Yeah, that's I've seen this one, Steve, on a number of occasions, and it gets referred to as gaming the metrics. I don't know if anybody else on the call has ever seen that. I'm really not totally sure what's happening, guys. Just to let you know, that when we dropped out, a lot of the messages. Can you guys see the messages still?
I can only see one or two messages at a time, so I only see the most recent one. So I can see a message from Neris, and that's all I can see.
Okay, I'm not sure why, but I can't see the messages anymore. Are there any additional messages come in that you can see?
I can't read the bottom of Neris's. Neris has just put one up. I get very cross with customers when they manage and incentivize their agents on NPS, post-transactional CSAT or nothing.
Yeah.
I can't see. Neris wrote a longer message just before that, and I can't see it at all. Neris, could I ask you to post it into the private chat? Because I seem to be able to see the private chat messages. And I seem to be able to see the historic messages. So would you mind terribly posting it into there? And I can read it back to Ian.
Because I've been thinking of jumping out and jumping back in again, but we've only got 4 minutes left of this particular session. So,
Steve, how many messages can you see? Because I can see 2.
The same as you, and I can only see a little bit. So Neris's earlier message, I can only read the first line. So I think we've got the same view. I've been trying to improve it.
Just coming back on the point that Neris made,
yep.
She's 100% right. That I absolutely hate it when people get incentivized on transactional NPS. There are so many inherent dangers of getting that completely and utterly wrong. So, yes, not good. Not good at all.
I can see Ian's gone again. So, Greg's put a message up saying, think streaming platforms could be a case study. Currently, it's in the horrible list. I think Ian will agree with you. He's frozen again. We'll just wait for Ian to try and come back on. Is that Ian there in the corner? With the gloves on?
No, I think that's a film star.
Oh.
I've never seen Fight Club. It's not amazing.
Huh? Well,
I've never seen Fight Club.
Ian said it's a really weird film to watch. So when he told me about it, I said I'm not going to watch it because it is weird. Because he said it's really strange.
Hello.
Hello.
Right, okay, guys, this has been an experience. I'm sorry, everybody. I think I'm going to have to talk to this streaming service. We've had 2 major dropouts in the space of an hour. Okay, we've just had another message from Bob Dolomite. I can't see. Has Neris come up with anything that you guys can see?
No, Neris hasn't posted anything back to you. She's going to try to put it into the private chat.
Okay, cool. But the point that Neris was making, absolutely 100%, incentivizing individuals on something like transactional NPS is terrible. So just going back to the point that Keith made previously, there are lots of ways in which you can get it wrong. So when you are implementing or providing data frontline people, I would suggest that you take some advice on the right and the wrong way of going about doing that. And if you want to have a chat with the 3 of us, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to do that. One additional question
Ian,
from
I've
Bob.
got Neris's message here. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes, please.
Sorry,
please go ahead.
And then we'll do Bob. So Neris has sent me her question, which is, Live Agent Assist is raging now as the must-have bit of tech. AHT, average handle time, it's like a swear word in contact centres, but the real-time assist is saying to the agent, slow down. It's telling them that they haven't cross-sold, and it's escalating to seniors when there are emotional triggers. The only agent assist I'm a fan of is highlighting verbatims they may have missed in a regulatory environment and pulling back relevant artifacts from the knowledge base. The rest is tech vendors getting excited, which there's a lot of.
Yeah, and we're artificial intelligence and a lot of the stuff that's done on sentiment and verbatim analysis. There's still a long way to go on that front. But the example that you've given there is a really brilliant one. If we can use sentiment analysis to actually identify those words that actually help us to tell agents to slow down, because if you get the agent to deliver what the customer wants, which might mean a longer call duration, it might mean a longer handling time, it's highly likely that the customer is not going to phone back upset because they're not getting what they expect to get. So that's a very, very important and well-known issue. Bob says, I work in an environment as a frontline employee where I am graded on the NPS question of how likely they are to recommend the company. It's treated as an LTR me. Does anybody know what an LTR me is? Long-term.
Can you enlighten us?
I don't know what LTR is. Long-term requirement. I don't know. Sorry, Bob. But we're not aware of what your 3-letter acronyms are within your company. Likely to recommend. There you go. It's treated as a likely to recommend me. Thanks for making that point. There is. I don't know what you think, Bob. It'd be interesting to get your view. If you can post a comment. But my view is that transactional NPS is bad. Because if the customer's unhappy, they will give you a negative score, even if the frontline member of staff has done a fantastic job. And that is, my main negative feedback relating to transactional NPS. We'll see whether Bob comes up with a comment in the next couple of seconds, which he may do. Right, okay, we can't stay on for too much longer. I think I'm going to have to go and have a word to my recommending me is different than recommending the company. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the point that Bob has made. I kind of get that, Bob, but what I would say is that often if you ask a customer whether they've had a bad experience or a good experience with the individual, if their experience with the individual is good, but their experience with the company is bad, there is a chance and a likelihood that the customer will just take it out on the individual anyway. And I've seen that before now.
Bob, what's your experience of it? So you're saying that the NPS there is to recommend you. How are you finding the experience of it? Because I'm also thinking that it's very difficult for an individual to say, okay, my experience with Bob was really good, but I didn't like his company. They just marked you as a whole. How are you finding it?
It'll be interesting to see what Bob has to say. We'll give it a couple of seconds for him to come through. It might take him a while to type this one in. But Amy, I wanted to, whilst we're waiting for Bob to, oh wait a minute, Bob has said, I think evaluating the interaction with frontline is different than the perception of company.
Yeah, okay.
In theory, Bob, I understand what you're saying, but what I would say is that sometimes customers aren't always logical. And if the customer's had a bad experience with the customer, despite having a good interaction with the individual, I have seen customers taking it out on the individual and blaming the individual, although it was nothing to do with the individual. That's just my personal experience. I'm not a fan of transactions.
Thank you very much, Bob.
And I don't, but thank you very much. I think evaluating the interaction with the frontline is different. Oh, sorry, I don't think he's added anything in there. Okay, we've been joined by Christopher Brooks. Let's just bring in Christopher very quickly before we get off the call. Christopher, how are you?
I'm good now I'm here.
Yeah, well, I had to apologise earlier to Greg and Glyn because this session was intended originally to just be me, Amy, and Steve. But when I sent the link out to people, a whole bunch of people came into the back end expecting to arrive on the stream. So although I did invite you, Christopher, I didn't mean to, so many apologies.
Oh, okay. No worries.
There you go. What a terrible host I am. Okay, well, what I'm going to do, everybody, is say hello. I love you and leave you, Christopher, and everybody else. I'd like to thank Steve and Amy for being my co-hosts on CX Club Live. We will do another session next week, and hopefully we'll have sorted out our connectivity issues in the meantime. I'd like to thank everybody for coming online. If anybody has any questions or comments, please do leave them on LinkedIn, leave them on Facebook, Twitter, Eventbrite, and was that everything? YouTube as well. And if you do have any comments or questions and you want to get into contact with us, please do feel free to reach out. Thank you very much, everybody, and until next week, thank you all for joining us on CX Club. We'll see you next week, guys.